On this day, December 8th, 1941, the Japanese begin their attacks on places in Asia as well as in Hawaii on the American forces at Pearl Harbor. It's popularly known that the attack began on December 7th, but because Asia was a day ahead, it began on December 8th. At this time, Japanese forces in Shanghai entered the international settlement and captured and imprisoned British, American, as well as other people of different nationalities. They left the French settlements, the French concession, alone, as they were part of Vichy France and were considered to be neutral. On the same day, they crossed the border into Hong Kong, beginning a fierce 2-week battle where British, Canadian and Indian troops fought bravely down the peninsula and on to Hong Kong Island, only surrendering on Christmas Day when it was obvious they couldn't fight anymore. If the British forces in Singapore had fought as fiercely as those in Hong Kong, Singapore would not have fallen when it did. At the same time, Japanese troops crossed the border into Siam, or Thailand, from Japanese-occupied French Indochina. They also landed troops along the Thai coast and near capital Bangkok. There was some fighting, but after 5 hours a ceasefire was called, and Thailand decided instead to become an ally of Japan, thus assisting the Japanese invasion of Burma. Japanese troops also landed on the British territory of Malaya, the various protectorates and colonies down there. They began their invasion, opposed by Australian, Indian and British troops. They managed to get ashore after fierce fighting, and then, using bicycles, managed to get through Malaya, the Malayan Peninsula, very quickly. At the same time, they attacked the Dutch East Indies. And, obviously, they had also attacked Pearl Harbor. But the other American territory they attacked was the Philippines. This was the beginning of a 6-month battle in which over 100,000 Filipinos were going to be killed or captured, and if they were captured it was almost worse than death, and tens of thousands of Americans. This was probably one of the most ambitious invasions and attacks in all of history. This wasn't an attack on one country or one country's territory. It was an attack on several. The United States, British Empire, the Dutch Empire, Thailand, and in different territories. They attacked 2 separate British territories. They attacked the Dutch territories, 2 different American territories, as well as British territory in China, the settlements I meant. So the concessions in Shanghai, which were very important and very large, pretty much the entire centre of the city was various concessions. They also took that. If you've seen the film Empire of the Sun, you'll see what it looked like, or could have looked like, when the Japanese finally did attack. It was an incredible success. Over the next few months, they were going to defeat British forces in Malaya, take Singapore. They were going to invade Burma and have Thailand as an ally. They were going to defeat the Americans over a 6-month period in the Philippines. They were going to take Guam and push the Americans and British deep into the Pacific Ocean. They were going to land troops on Papua New Guinea, They were going to be fighting all over the world. They were going to send troops and battleships into the Indian Ocean, where they would attack British naval bases in Ceylon and in India itself. They would eventually get to the gates of India at the Battle of Imphal, and they would be in India itself, only being stopped at that point. And down the other way, they bombed Darwin in Australia. They captured parts of the Solomon Islands, and they were only stopped at Guadalcanal. And in the east, they were only stopped at Midway, and in the north, they were only stopped in Alaska. It is incredible what they managed to do in those few months. But besides being audacious, being ambitious, it was also futile. Without the oil that they needed, and yes, they had some oil in the Dutch East Indies, but how do they get that back to Japan if the Americans are sinking their vessels? They can't. At this point, Japan was already going to lose. There was no way that Japan could win at this point. It just did not have the capabilities to win. It had the capability to attack. And how were they so successful? Well, Holland was occupied. Britain was occupied with fighting Germany. Most of the Royal Navy and British troops were in Africa or Britain itself or on the high seas around Europe. A lot of the aid and a lot of the attention was going to Russia to keep that in the war. The Far East wasn't the main priority. Japan could not have done this unless the world had already been in a state of war. They took the chance. They thought maybe if they shock the world enough, they'll say, okay, you can keep those territories you took. Maybe Japan would have to hand over a few back or something. But as long as they could keep most of it, then they could continue with their main war aim, which is conquering China. And this is the thing that they couldn't do. Much like the Germans in Russia, the Japanese just could not take this vast country. It was too big, too many people. And people talk about how Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists weren't very good fighting the Japanese. But the Japanese lost. They did not conquer all of China. They only conquered small parts, and some important parts, the Great Plain in the north, Shanghai and Guangzhou and the ports. But they didn't get in to Sichuan or Guizhou or Shanxi. They didn't get that far. They couldn't, because the Chinese were fighting them. This is where we see Japan has lost. Japan had a choice. The Americans gave them a choice. Withdraw from China. Not Manchuria, they could keep that, but from the rest of China. Withdraw from French Indochina, and the oil embargo will stop. If they had decided to do that, they would have kept Korea, Manchuria, Taiwan, and all those Pacific islands, and the Marianas, the Carolines. But they weren't happy with that. And so they rolled the dice, and they hoped that it would work. They didn't, and they lost it all. They lost Taiwan, they lost Korea, they lost Manchuria, they lost all those lovely islands, the Kuril Islands and Sakhalin. It's all gone, because they made this fatal mistake. If you like these videos, come back tomorrow for more. Subscribe, comment, and like.